Check the description for the following discount codes. So this is quite a commonly asked question in the sim racing community, whether you're a new sim racer or even a sim racer, that's been into the hobby for maybe a year or so, and you're thinking maybe it's time to upgrade. What should I get first? Would it be a steering wheel and wheelbase? Should it be new pedals? Should it be a cockpit? Should it be a bigger monitor? Should I go triple? Should I go VR? So many choices. And this makes it not the easiest question to answer, because everyone's going to be at a slightly different point in the hobby. You may already have, let's say an aluminium profile cockpit, and you may not need to upgrade that ever again. You may already have triple screens. You may already have a direct drive wheel. But if you haven't got everything, there's always something we can upgrade. And even when we do have everything, there's still always something we can upgrade. So this video is going to be from the perspective of people like myself who started out on a desk with a Logitech G920, or these days the G923, and then moved up to a wheel stand, and then moved up to a full-size cockpit, and then eventually got an aluminium profile one. It's going to be from people like me back then who hadn't been in the hobby long and were starting out with the basics. So this is going to assume that you've got something in the way of a steering wheel and wheelbase that gives you force feedback, something like one of the Logitech G series or the Thrustmaster equivalent. If you haven't got that, if you're on a cheap £40 wheel from Argos that only rotates 180 degrees maximum and is just returned by a spring, then the very first thing you should upgrade should be that to something like a Logitech G923 or the Thrustmaster equivalent, because that will net you the biggest improvement in the hobby and in experience and gains over anything else. There's no point buying an £800 cockpit to fit a £40 steering wheel and base with two plastic pedals that feel exactly the same and that are effectively a child's toy. So we'll assume you've got at least something equivalent to the Logitech G series of steering wheels. Now, this will depend what you have got, of course. So this kind of extension of my previous video about what cockpit to buy. The two things that affect your sim racing experience the most are, and this is my opinion and experience I suppose, are the cockpit you're sat in and the steering wheel and wheelbase that you use. The reason for that is your cockpit is what everything is bolted to. This is the base of your sim racing experience. It's what everything attaches to. It's what you attach to. You sit in it. It's what your steering wheel attaches to, your pedals, your shifter, even your monitors potentially, tactile transducers, everything bolts to your cockpit. If you have a cheap wobbly cockpit that literally wobbles around, flexes up and down, both with the steering wheel mounts, maybe even where your seat's attached, maybe it lifts up in the middle under hard braking, it's taking away from whatever information, feedback, detail that your steering wheel and your other devices are giving you. Because even with something as entry level as a Logitech G series steering wheel, it has force feedback. It's not very strong, but it's there. If that's then being dampened by the cockpit it's bolted to being able to wobble around, you're not going to feel what detail there is there or what forces there are available there cleanly and clearly versus if it was bolted to something rock solid that didn't move. This is actually more important for lower end wheels that aren't very powerful. If you put a direct drive wheel on, let's say, a GT Amiga Art cockpit, that has a reasonable amount of flex and wobble from factory. It can be improved with some simple modifications, but from new it does, and it's an entry level full-size cockpit, so it's to be expected. You put a direct drive wheel on there, you can turn the force feedback up to make sure you feel everything that's coming out of that wheel by exaggerating it. If you've got a Logitech G923 or the equivalent and put it on there, it's already running flat out. No one ever turns their Logitech steering wheel power down because it doesn't have much in the first place. So if that's absorbed by wobble and flex, you're missing out on important information about what your car is doing in whatever simulator you happen to be driving. One of the things I noticed going from my art, and I stiffened my art up. So in fact, I noticed going from without stiffening it up to stiffen it up straight away, the difference was night and day with what I felt from my Logitech G920, which I still have here actually. And then the same applied again when I went from that to a aluminium profile cockpit. Running because I did my review of the GT Amiga Prime using my G920, and you don't realise how much you're missing out of that, what that little wheel can produce by having a cockpit that can flex and wobble. You really do miss out on a lot. So my advice, if you don't have a solid cockpit, and this is for people that want to upgrade and that are into the hobby now, not for newbies obviously. For newbies, you buy the best you can afford, relevant to your situation. Maybe you need a fold-away cockpit, maybe you're just tipping your toe in, so you don't want to spend too much, you don't know if you're going to like the hobby or not. Bear in mind all those variables. This is for people that know they want to go further. If you've got an entry-level cockpit, if you're still on a desk, like how I started out, if you're on a wheel stand, if you're on maybe a GT Amiga Art, and you're thinking, I am going to get a stronger wheel further down the line, or even just running the Logitech G Series, like I said a minute ago, if you can afford to get a slightly stiffer cockpit, maybe you go aluminium profile, the Prime from GT Amiga, maybe you buy one from Sim Labs, maybe you buy one from Next Level Racing, wherever you buy one from, if you upgrade your cockpit first, from whatever entry-level setup you might have, you've then got that solid base for the future. And depending on what you buy, you may never have to purchase another cockpit again. And even, if you've still got your Logitech G920 or G29, whatever it is, and you're thinking it's a bit silly to bolt this to a bloody SimLabs P1X, it's not. You will notice a night and day difference going from a cockpit that has flex and wobble to one that doesn't, even with these smaller, less powerful entry-level wheels. So I would always do the cockpit first, assuming you have a wheel that does reasonable force feedback anyway, like a Logitech or a Thrustmaster. And then the very next thing I would do would then be the steering wheel and base, because that is the thing that gives you the second, well, that's where all your feedback about what your car is doing comes from. Pedals don't give you feedback. Pedals simply affect the way they feel underfoot, and perhaps, and this is very much opinion based here, your consistency under braking. A low cell based pedal should be easier to reliably and consistently brake and modulate your braking. But some of the fastest sim racers in the world are fast on Logitech G920s with the pedals, because ultimately your brain, your muscles can adapt to whatever it is you're using, and with enough practice you can be fast using pretty much anything. What differs in sim racing from the real world is that everything is repeatable exactly the same over and over again. You can set the same weather conditions, the same temperature, track temperature, you can set the same car, the same tyres, the same braking distribution, the same suspension. You can make everything identical every single time you race, which means every time you approach the apex of a particular corner, it will behave, the car, exactly the same. In the real world, this never ever happens. It's completely, not completely different, but it can be vastly different depending on the time of year, the atmospheric temperature, pressure, moisture, the tyre compound you're using. It can all be how worn the brake pads might be, how old the engine. Look, there's so many variables. In sim racing, everything is fixed, or at least you can choose it to be. So you can learn to be fast using even the cheapest of force feedback wheel setups like the Logitech and their accompanying pedals. So this is why I say pedals, not such a big deal from an upgrade point of view early on, because they won't necessarily enhance, well they won't enhance your sim racing experience as much as a solid cockpit or a better steering wheel base and wheel, because that is what gives you your feedback about what your car is doing, how much grip you have, how hard you're cornering, the texture of the road surface you're going over, whether you're clipping a curb or not. That's all through your steering wheel at this point. Obviously later on down the road, if you've added tactile transducers or a motion setup, you've got additional cues. But going back to, early days of sim racing, when I'm looking to upgrade, and this is the sort of people I'm talking to today, a solid cockpit followed by a new wheelbase and accompanying wheel would be my number one and number two upgrades. And whether you go from a Logitech to, we've got potentially some direct drive offerings coming from Thrustmaster at some point this year, so that might be another option further down the line. But at the time of recording, you've got the Fanatic CSL-DD, which would be a perfect upgrade for anyone from a Logitech G Series or a Thrustmaster T300, TX, T500, TSPC Racer. The TSPC Racer puts out a similar amount of torque to the Fanatic CSL-DD, a bit less if we're using the boost pack with the CSL-DD. But the difference in smoothness and responsiveness of a direct drive motor versus a belt driven one is also night and day. So that's, for me, good solid cockpit, assuming you've got a Logitech or equivalent steering wheel. Then do your steering wheel and base, whether you go from belt driven, whether you go from gear driven to belt driven, because even going from the Logitech to a Thrustmaster T300 or TX is a PC equivalent, it's still a big upgrade in smoothness and the way it feels, much nicer. But these days, with that Fanatic CSL-DD being priced as it is, it's only a little bit further to go there. But that's that upgrade path. And then I would say the third thing I would upgrade would be my display. I see an awful lot of people with actually quite reasonable cockpits, steering wheels, pedals, shifters, and they're racing on piddly little 28-inch or even 32-inch monitors. And that's not to insult people that have small monitors. If you race on a small monitor because for your circumstances you have to, then that's absolutely fine. Maybe you're still desk bound. Maybe that's all you have space for. I'm not trying to put you down. I'm just simply comparing sizes, and you know, a 28-inch monitor compared to even a 40-inch monitor is tiny by comparison. And what we want to do with our sim racing setup is have things as lifelike as possible, hence the word simulation, you know. So the bigger your display can be, even if it's only a single screen, the better. Because in a perfect world, you want what you're seeing in front of you to be one-to-one scale with real life. What's always amusing is seeing someone with a nice steering wheel, again on a 28-inch monitor. The steering wheel is literally 3/4 of the size of like their virtual dashboard on their display. Because if you have a 28-inch monitor and you set the scaling so it would be one-to-one with real life, you'd see about this much of the world because the monitor is too small or it's too far away. I mean, you can bring a 28-inch screen closer to you, but you can't have it on your nose because you wouldn't be able to focus. So for me, a solid cockpit followed by a, you know, mid to mid-high steering wheel and base, and then follow that with a display. These days, second-hand, you can pick up 40 to 50-inch 1080p TVs, and 1080p is fine if you're upgrading from a smaller setup. I don't want people bitching in the comments going, no, you should get 4K. No, you don't have to get 4K. 1080p is fine. You'll still get a good experience, and this will be budget dependent. If you can afford a 4K 86-inch TV, awesome. You go ahead, you use one. But for other people who are just going incremental and don't have the biggest budget in the world, picking up a second-hand 50-inch, 60-inch, 65-inch 1080p TV, you know, for anywhere between 50 and £200 is a great upgrade and will enhance your sim racing experience tenfold over playing on a 28-inch or 32-inch screen, perhaps sat on the desk. And once you've done those three things, once you've got a solid cockpit, a good steering wheel, base and wheel, and a decent sized display, and I've done videos on how you should configure your display, as in how far it should be from you, where your eye level should be, and how you would adjust and calculate your field of view to get that correct. I did it primarily for triple screens, but the same principle applies to a single screen as well. You know, your field of view should be set based on the size of the screen and how far it is from your seated position in your sim rig. It's not something you just randomly guess at or type in a figure or move a slider. If you want it to be 1-to-1 scale with the real world, you calculate it and you do it properly. And you do all these three things: your cockpit, your steering wheel base, and a reasonable size display, and you'll have such a good time in whatever your chosen sim is versus what you had before. You'll never want to go back. And then of course from this point on, it's all about luxuries really. You can buy expensive pedals, you can buy an expensive shifter, you can buy motion, you can add another 2 screens to a triple setup, you can put a roof over the top like what I've done in the background there, so you feel like you're more in there. The sky's the limit. But I think, and this really is obviously my opinion and it's drawn from experience, the first 3 things I would do: cockpit, if you haven't already got a solid one, a decent steering wheel and accompanying wheelbase if you haven't already got one, and then a reasonable size display, again, if you haven't already got one. Virtual reality is an option, again, there's all other things you can do. But they're the 3 basics that will give you a nice rounded experience and let you enjoy sim racing. Because I remember when I first tried a few different sims years and years ago on my desk monitor, you know, with my Logitech steering wheel bolted or clamped to the desk, it just didn't really gel, you know. I was like, it's a bit crap, you know. There's no feeling of speed. I'm just coming off every corner. Nothing. I'm sitting at a stupid position. Pedals are up against the wall. It put me off, you know, sim racing in the beginning. It was only once I started playing on a larger TV that I had in the front room using a wheel stand, you know, in some dirt rally, that I thought, actually, this is all right. So don't do yourself out of a good experience by perhaps not giving it the best chance you can. But anyway, I'm waffling on, slightly sidetracked here. But yes, they're my 3 sort of top 3 upgrades that I would do: a cockpit, steering wheel, if you don't already have one, same for the cockpit, and then a reasonable size display. So hopefully that will be helpful to some random people out there that are new to sim racing or looking at their first upgrade path or wondering what they should do. As always, thank you very much for watching and take it easy.